Let's time travel to the ancient era where we know human hunts food for survival. In the ancient era, the human maybe use whatever resources available to them and use it to their advantage. For example, they use the sun to dry the food. Maybe they found out that at the time, by drying the food, it can make it last longer. Not only beef, it can also be fruits or vegetables, and even seafood, where we know is highly perishable. Back then, there's no refrigerator, so any perishable food can go bad at no time. So here are an example of some of the food that have been actually used until now due to this technique that is being invented in the ancient era. So here is a picture of dried fruits, dried vegetables, and sometimes nuts. And this is actually dried fish. So maybe they got like a big whole whale, and then it's so big that they couldn't finish it at one time. So they want to make sure that this food supply maybe can be shared with the whole community. So they have to make sure they dried it so it can last longer. By adding salt can be one of the preservation technique. It's actually make the food dry by drawing out water when they add the salt, and also followed by drying as well. For fruits and vegetables, maybe to add a little more of freshness to it as compared to dried vegetables or fruit, they invented pickling by soaking these vegetables and fruit in a brine solution or sugar solution in a closed container like this. Another method is fermentation. This is actually a salami where it is hanged here to allow it to ferment it for a certain period of time. By fermenting, they add to the beef salt or any other ingredient that they found that by adding all these ingredients can make this beef stay longer, and also it's added more taste to it than just a plain or salty dried beef. According to the history of microbiology, it is not until 1600 where first ever microscopic life have been documented and recorded. This is thanks to Antony van Leeuwenhoek, where he used his spare time while he's working by grinding lenses to study this microscopic life, which he termed is as animalcules, which is later known as bacteria. So you can see that he described it pretty much explicitly what he observed using this device here. We can call it as ancient microscope. Following astonishing findings from Antony van Leeuwenhoek, a lot of scientists have come up with numbers of theories to explain the presence of microorganisms. One of the theories is spontaneous generation theory, where it mentions that microorganisms actually derive from non-living matter. However, one of the scientists from France, who is Louis Pasteur, disproved this theory. He found out that microorganisms can be coming from air. So he know this by performing an experiment called Swannick flask experiment. What basically he did is that he heat-treated the broth. Broth actually contain a lot of nutrients that can support microbial growth. So he heat-treated the broth to kill any microorganism in this broth, let it sit, and then after it cools, nothing happened. That means the broth stays sterile, it's not contaminated. The second step, this time he removed the neck to expose the heat-treated broth to air. After it remained cool, after some time, he observed that the broth is contaminated. The same thing when he tilted the flask sideways, where if you can see that here, the small amount of broth is being exposed to air, and then after some time, the broth found contaminated. So, based on the principle of this finding, he invented milk pasteurization technique. By heating up the milk to a certain temperature, actually kill the microorganism that present in the milk to extend milk shelf life. Milk is highly perishable because it has a lot of nutrients that can support microbe growth. Another significant finding in microbiology actually Koch postulates, which is also support Pasteur finding previously. This time, what Koch postulates experiment is all about is that it wants to identify microorganisms that can cause illness. So, one of the most important steps in order to determine the pathogenic microorganism is illustrated in this diagram. So the microorganism has to be isolated from the dead animal body, and then after identification of the microorganism, it is then injected to the healthy mice and see whether this microorganism can cause illness or not. And if it is then re-isolate and then re-identify, and then now it confirmed that this microorganism can cause illness. So, from both findings of Pasteur and Koch, it is confirmed that the germ that they call it at that time, which represent microorganism, actually can cause disease. In addition to Pasteur and Koch finding, it is worth to mention that there are other scientists that have invented techniques that help extend food shelf life. One of them is Nicholas Appert, where he is considered as the father of canning. Also have Ilya Mechnikov, a Russian scientist, where found out that lactic acid bacteria in fermented milk can actually improve a quality of life, can make human live longer, and this is later known as a probiotic. Other significant findings include scientists who have isolated foodborne pathogen. One example is Clostridium botulinum, which is anaerobic microorganism. By anaerobic, I mean this microorganism can live without the presence of oxygen. So it first isolated from sausage, which have killed 3 people upon consuming it. It can live in an anaerobic condition in a sausage mainly because the interior of the sausage is a little anaerobic. It's not exposed to air, it's not exposed to oxygen, so that's how botulinum can survive. Other inventions include a frozen food, vacuum packaging food, as well as food irradiation. So for food irradiation, it's interesting because it's actually most research have been conducted by NASA, which the aim is that to make sure that astronauts consume only safe food. So they have to consume sterile food. They cannot afford to get sick because there's no hospital in the space. Fast forward to 19th centuries, where the understanding about food microbiology have strengthened, the technology had advances, it comes with great complexity in terms of governing the food safety and quality. So one global body that can be used as a global reference point for food safety and quality is actually Codex. So basically, Codex cover food hygiene, food additive, the use of pesticide or contaminant labeling, and also establish their methods to analyze food sample, and also set of regulation to import or export food within countries, and also regulation about certification. Most countries refers to Codex for this matter, but however, it is not enforceable unless that particular country want to adopt Codex, or else they have their own national standard that they follow to make sure they produce safe food.